Can you imagine opening your front door and finding someone you love but not recognizing their face? When Sarah turned the doorknob that cold October afternoon in Springfield, Illinois, she never imagined her life was about to change forever. On the other side of the door stood a man. Deep scars cut across his face like maps of a silent war. His eyes, once bright and full of life, now seemed like two empty, bottomless wells devoid of light. But there was something in that gaze, something that made Sarah's heart stop for an eternity. It was James, or at least it was what remained of him. Have you ever wondered what really happens to a soldier when he returns from war? We see the parades, the flags, the emotional embraces at airports, but what happens afterwards? What happens when the cameras turn off and reality knocks on the door? What happens when someone loses not only parts of their body but parts of their very soul? James was 24 years old when he left. He was a vibrant young man, the kind who lit up any room. He had dreams, plans, a whole life ahead of him. He believed he was doing the right thing, serving his country, protecting the people he loved. But war has a price that no one tells you on the day you enlist. Stay with me until the end, because this story will show you something most people never see about war veterans. Something that can completely change how you view the true cost of freedom. When James boarded that military plane bound for the front, he carried in his backpack photos of home, letters from his family, and a small compass that Sarah had given him as a gift. "So you can always find your way back," she had written on the note. But nobody tells soldiers that sometimes you return home, but a part of you remains forever buried in foreign lands. The wounds James brought back from the war were much more than the visible scars. Much more than the broken bones or burned skin. Have you ever experienced something so traumatic that you simply can't be the same person anymore? There's a transformation that happens on the battlefield, a painful metamorphosis that destroys who you were and leaves you unsure of who you are now. PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is an invisible prison. People look at you and think you should be happy to have survived. But how do you explain that surviving isn't the same as living? For 3 long years, James wandered the streets of different American cities. Chicago, Detroit, small villages that didn't even have names. He became a ghost, invisible to the world he swore to protect. He slept in shelters when he was lucky, under bridges when he wasn't. What you're about to discover may surprise you. Because while James disappeared into the shadows of society, there was someone who never gave up. Someone who believed that behind those scars still existed the essence of the boy she knew in childhood. Sarah didn't accept the official version. She didn't accept it when they said he was missing. She didn't accept it when they whispered that maybe it would be better to forget, to move on. Because there's something powerful in the act of not forgetting someone. And that's exactly what Sarah didn't accept the official version. She didn't accept it when they said he was missing. She didn't accept it when they whispered that maybe it would be better to forget, to move on. Because there's something powerful in the act of not forgetting someone. And that's exactly what saved James's life. You know, before I continue this story, I need to ask you something. Have you ever had someone in your life who simply didn't give up on you? Someone who saw value in you even when you couldn't see anything else? Leave a comment below. Tell us who that person was, or if you've ever been that person to someone, because these stories need to be shared. They remind us that humanity still exists, even in the darkest places. And look, if this kind of content resonates with you, if real stories of overcoming adversity, resilience, and transformation touch your heart, leave a like below. It's not just a little button, you know? It's your way of saying this message matters, more people need to see this. Your participation here is literally what makes this channel grow and reach more people who may be going through something similar, who may need to hear that there is hope after trauma. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, subscribe now and turn on notifications. Because every week we bring you true stories of people who rose from the ashes, who found light after the deepest darkness. These are stories that the mainstream media doesn't tell, lives that deserve to be honored. You'll want to be here for the next ones. Trust me. Now come back with me to that October afternoon. Because what happened when Sarah looked into the eyes of that broken man was the beginning of something that science can barely explain, but that the heart understands perfectly. She didn't see the scars first. She saw ... She didn't see the scars first. She saw the way that man held his hands, interlacing his fingers nervously, exactly as James did when he was a child. She saw his posture, slightly leaning to the left. The same since he fell off his bicycle at age 10 and fractured his collarbone. But before understanding who was there, we need to go back in time. Because James's transformation didn't begin at that door. It began much earlier in a very distant place. James grew up in Springfield, Illinois, one of those heartland American cities where everyone knows everyone. He was the kind of kid who helped neighbors carry groceries, played basketball on the school court until sunset, and dreamed big. At 24, he had that sparkle in his eyes that only someone who still believes in the world can have. He worked in his father's auto repair shop during the day and studied engineering at night. He had plans. He wanted to start his own business, travel, build a family. His whole life was there waiting for him like an open map on a table. But in 2008, something changed. The military recruiter visited Springfield and spoke about honor, about serving your country, about making a difference. And James, with that heart too generous for his own good, felt it was his duty. He enlisted for Iraq. The war had already been going on for years, but for him it was an opportunity to protect something greater than himself. His mother cried the day he left. Sarah, who at the time had been his best friend since they were 7 years old, handed him that compass and said, "Promise you'll come back." He smiled in that confident way and replied, "I promise." He left as a hero. He returned as a ghost. But what really happens when a soldier goes to war? We romanticize it a lot, you know? We watch movies, play video games, hear stories of courage and bravery. But the truth hidden behind the medals and decorations is brutal. James spent 18 months in Iraqi territory. 18 months where every second could be his last, where the sound of a car passing on the street could mean an explosion, where you learn not to trust anyone, not to feel too much, because feeling too much can kill you. The explosion happened on a Tuesday in March. James was on routine patrol with his platoon when an improvised explosive device detonated a few meters from the vehicle. The impact was devastating. 3 of his comrades died instantly. James survived, but survival is a relative concept when you're talking about war. He suffered third-degree burns over 40% of his body, multiple fractures, mild traumatic brain injury, and something far worse than all of that combined, a wound to the soul that doesn't show up on any X-ray. The physical injuries were severe, but they were visible. Doctors knew what to do with broken bones and burned skin. But what about that part of him that was buried in the rubble of that street in Baghdad? That part that woke up screaming every night, reliving the explosion, hearing the screams of his friends, smelling the burning flesh. That part no one knew how to heal. PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder, is one of the cruelest realities of modern warfare. Studies show that approximately 20% of veterans who served in Iraq and Afghanistan suffer from PTSD. This means that 1 in 5 returning soldiers carries an internal war that never ends. It's a silent, invisible, but utterly destructive battle. James began experiencing intense flashbacks. Loud noises instantly transported him back to that day. He developed panic attacks without warning. He lost the pleasure he once loved. His mindset completely changed. The world became divided into threats and non-threats. There was no longer room for joy, for dreams, for hope. The wounds that no one saw were the deepest. Because you can reconstruct a face with plastic surgery. You can teach someone to walk again with physical therapy, but how do you rebuild the ability to trust? How do you restore peace to someone who has forgotten what it's like to sleep without nightmares? Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what happened to James after the explosion reveals something fundamental about how our society treats its veterans. He spent 8 months in a military hospital in Germany before being transferred to the United States. There were 17 reconstructive surgeries. Months of skin grafts, painful physical therapy, learning to eat again, to hold objects, to perform basic movements that were once automatic. Each day was a war against his own body. But the hardest part wasn't the physical pain. It was looking in the mirror. James looked at that reflection and didn't recognize who was there. Scars cut across his face in irregular shapes. The grafted skin had a different texture, a different color. Part of his left ear was gone. Hair no longer grew in some areas. He had lost something far beyond his face. He had lost himself, the image he had of who he was, of how the world saw him, of how he related to other people. All of that was destroyed along with that military vehicle. And here's a truth that few people talk about. A war veteran's journey doesn't end when they return home. In fact, in many cases, that's when the hardest part begins. Because on the battlefield, at least you have a clear mission. You know who the enemy is. You have your comrades by your side. But when you return, you're alone, trying to fit into a world that moved on without you, a world that doesn't understand what you've been through. When James was finally discharged from the hospital and returned to Springfield, he didn't tell his family. He didn't call Sarah. He simply arrived in the early hours of the morning, took a taxi from the airport, and went straight to a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. Why? Because he was ashamed. He was ashamed of how he looked, ashamed of no longer being the man he promised to return. Ashamed of being alive when 3 of his friends weren't. Survivor's guilt is real. It's when you carry the impossible weight of having continued to exist while others didn't have that chance. James asked himself every day, why me? Why wasn't it me who died? Why them, who had wives, children, bright futures ahead of them? This guilt gnawed at him from the inside like acid. And the worst part is that nobody around him could understand. How do you explain to someone who has never been in a war zone that you feel guilty for being alive? He avoided everyone. He changed his phone number. He didn't answer letters. When his mother finally found out where he was and went to visit him, James barely opened the door. Said he was fine, that he needed some time, that she should come home. She begged, she cried, but he closed the door. Because in his mind, distorted by trauma, he was protecting the people he loved. He believed he was a burden, that his presence would only bring pain, that it was better to disappear. And that's exactly what he did. 3 weeks later, James left Springfield. No warning, no note. He simply vanished. He began a journey without a destination along American roads, living in the shadows of society. He slept in homeless shelters when he could find a spot, under overpasses when he couldn't. Some nights when the temperature dropped too low, he would stay awake all night walking because it was safer than freezing in his sleep. James became invisible. And here's something that will shock you. There are thousands of Jameses out there. It's estimated that around 40,000 war veterans are homeless in the United States on any given night. 40,000 people who served their country and now sleep on sidewalks. The impact of this on our society is immense, but we simply don't see it. We pass them on the street, look away, and go on with our lives because it's easier not to see. But while James was fading away, there was someone who refused to ignore him. Sarah never accepted his silence. She had known James since they were children. They grew up on the same street, went to the same school, shared the same childhood dreams. She remembered the boy who defended her from bullies in elementary school, the teenager who taught her how to change a car tire, the young man who stayed up all night with her when her grandfather passed away, simply sitting beside her, silent, being present. Sarah never had the courage to say it, but she had always loved James. Not in a desperate or dramatic way, but in that deep, quiet way that grows with time. It was the kind of love built on thousands of small moments, on shared laughter, on glances that said more than words. And now, he was gone. But she couldn't, no matter how hard she tried, simply move on. She visited every veterans hospital in the state. Then she expanded to neighboring states. She printed thousands of copies of an old photo of James and pasted them on lampposts in shelters and in community centers. She created social media pages dedicated to finding him. She contacted veteran support organizations. She spent entire weekends walking through areas where homeless people congregated, showing the photo and asking if anyone had seen him. People around her began to say it was time to accept it, that maybe James didn't want to be found, that she was wasting her life on an impossible search. Her own mother, worried, suggested she seek therapy, move on with her life, find someone who would truly be there. But Sarah had something no one else had: unwavering faith. Not necessarily religious faith, but faith in human connection. Faith that the James she knew was still there, somewhere, just needing someone who refused to forget. For 3 years, this was her journey. 3 years of searching, 3 years of believing, 3 years of carrying hope when everyone around her had given up, and her pain was real too. She cried alone at night. She questioned if she was being foolish. There were days when she almost gave up, but always, something inside her said, just one more day. Search, just one more day. And then, one October afternoon, 3 years after James's disappearance, Sarah was in Chicago. She'd gone to the city for a job interview, trying to rebuild her own life while continuing the search. She decided to stop by a park before catching the train back. Grant Park, right in the city center. There was something comforting about walking among the trees, watching the people, breathing fresh air amidst the urban chaos. That's when she saw him, or rather, when something caught her attention. A man was sitting on a bench, hunched over, his clothes dirty and torn. It wasn't uncommon. Chicago, like any large American city, has its share of people living on the streets. She almost walked right past him, but then something made her stop. Something about the way that man was sitting, the way he held his hands. Sarah didn't recognize his face. How could she? The scars had completely altered his features. His beard was long and tangled. His body was thinner, almost skeletal, but she recognized the way he tied his shoes. It was such a specific, unique detail that her heart skipped a beat. James always tied his shoes differently, making 2 knots instead of 1, because as a child he never learned the traditional way and invented his own method. She approached slowly, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst. Her hands trembled. When she was just a few feet away, she whispered, "James?" He didn't react. She repeated a little louder, "James, is that you?" This time he slowly raised his head, and their eyes met. At that moment, time and space stopped. Everything around them disappeared. It was just the two of them. James looked at her with a mixture of confusion, fear, and something that seemed like a distant spark of recognition. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no sound came out. Sarah knelt in front of him, tears already streaming down her face, and said in a choked voice, "James, it's me. It's Sarah." He shook his head as if trying to dispel an illusion. "No," he murmured in a rough voice broken by disuse. I'm not him anymore." But Sarah took his hands, those calloused and dirty hands, and held them tightly. "Yes, you are. You always have been. I know you, James. I've known you since you were 7 and stole a cookie from my lunchbox." And then she began to tell stories. "Remember when we built that tree fort in the backyard and you fell and broke your arm? Remember the time we skipped school to see that movie and your mom found out? Remember when you taught me how to skateboard and I twisted my ankle and you carried me on your back for 6 blocks to my house? Remember the song we used to sing in the car when we went to the lake in the summer?" With each story, something changed on James's face. The barriers began to crack. The fog that covered his eyes began to dissipate. Until Sarah began to sing. It was a silly song, an old country song they used to sing on car trips. She sang softly, her voice trembling, but with all her heart. And James broke down. For the first time in years, he cried. They weren't silent tears. It was a deep, violent cry, as if years of repressed pain had finally found an outlet. He bent forward and Sarah hugged him, holding that broken man as he sobbed against her shoulder. There, in that Chicago park, amidst hundreds of strangers passing by oblivious, something miraculous happened. Someone saw him, not the scars, not the homeless man, not the broken veteran, but him, James, the person he had always been, who still existed somewhere beneath all those layers of trauma and pain. Because you see, there's something profoundly powerful in the act of being recognized, in the act of someone looking at you and saying, "I see you. I know who you are. You matter." In psychology, this is called identity validation, and it's one of the most crucial elements for human mental health. When James lost his face, he lost the way the world recognized him. And without external recognition, he began to lose internal recognition. He stopped knowing who he was. But Sarah gave it back to him, with stories, with memories, with unconditional love. She gave him back his name, and a name isn't just a word. It's your story. It's your identity. It's proof that you exist, that you matter, that there are people in the world who carry you within them. That day, Sarah didn't leave James alone. She convinced him to go with her. It wasn't easy. He resisted. He said she didn't understand, that he couldn't go back, that it was too late. But Sarah, with that determination that had kept her searching for 3 years, stood firm. "You promised you'd come back," she said. "And I promised I'd wait for you. Neither of us has broken our promise yet." She took him to a shelter where he could take a hot shower, receive clean clothes, and have a decent meal. And then she made what was perhaps the most important decision. She connected him with a specialized treatment center for veterans with PTSD. The journey of rebuilding wasn't quick. It wasn't easy. In fact, it was one of the hardest things they had ever faced. James began intensive therapy, specifically focused on war trauma. He participated in cognitive behavioral therapy, which helps reshape destructive thought patterns. He tried EMDR, a technique that uses eye movements to process traumatic memories. He joined a support group with other veterans, where he could finally talk about his experiences with people who truly understood. But for the first time in years, James wasn't alone. Sarah was there. Not every day, because she also had her own life to rebuild. But she was present. During the difficult sessions, during the relapses, on the nights when the nightmares returned in full force, she was simply there, being present, being a reminder that he was more than his trauma. And here's something veteran support programs have discovered through years of research. The support network is just as important as professional treatment. Veterans who have at least one significant person in their lives involved in their recovery have dramatically higher success rates. It's not about saving someone. It's about walking alongside them. It's about witnessing someone else's journey. Slowly, month after month, James began to be reborn. He didn't return to who he was before, because that would be impossible. The war had changed him permanently. The scars, both physical and emotional, would always be a part of him. But he discovered something powerful. He could become someone new, Someone who carried the pain but wasn't defined by it. Someone who knew the darkness but chose to walk towards the light. 2 years after that reunion in the park, James made a decision that would change not only his life, but the lives of hundreds of other veterans. He began working as a volunteer counselor at a support center for homeless veterans. Because he knew better than anyone what it was like to be lost. He knew what it was like to look in the mirror and not recognize himself. He knew what it was like to feel that the world would be better off without him. And he used that knowledge, that journey through hell and back, to help others find their own way back. This is what psychologists call post-traumatic growth. It's the idea that sometimes the most devastating experiences in our lives can become our greatest sources of purpose and meaning. Not because trauma is good, it never is. But because if we manage to survive it, if we have the right support, we can emerge with a deeper understanding of the human condition, with more empathy, with more strength. James would never again be the 24-year-old who left for Iraq full of dreams and innocence. That James died in that explosion. But he discovered who he could become after it. He became someone who understood pain. Someone who could look into the eyes of a broken veteran and say with absolute authority, "I know how you feel, and I'm here to tell you that there is a way back." And Sarah? Sarah remained Sarah. She built her own career, her own life. She and James eventually spoke about that unspoken love that had always existed between them. It wasn't a perfect fairy tale ending, because real life never is. But it was real. It was honest. It was built on a foundation of true friendship and a conscious choice day after day to be there for each other. Their story teaches us something fundamental about human nature. We are relational beings. We need each other. No matter how strong you are, how independent, how resilient, there are times in life when you need someone who refuses to give up on you. And equally important, there are times when you can be that person for someone else. War steals so much from those who go. It steals innocence. It steals the feeling of security. Sometimes it steals body parts. Often it steals peace of mind. But sometimes a single person who refuses to forget can give back what matters most. The memory that we are still human. The memory that we have a name. The memory that we matter. Today, as you watch this video, thousands of veterans are fighting silent battles. Some are in shelters. Others are sleeping in parks. Many are in their own homes, isolated, suffering alone. The statistics are alarming. 22. American veterans die by suicide every day. 22. That means that while you watch this video, at least one veteran made the decision that they could no longer go on. But there are also thousands of stories of rebuilding, of rebirth, of people who found their way back. And in most of these stories, there is a common denominator. Someone who didn't give up. Someone who refused to turn their back. Someone who reached out and said, "You are not alone." Perhaps you know a veteran. Perhaps you know someone who is suffering in silence, carrying trauma that no one sees. Or perhaps you are that person. And if you are, I want you to know your story is not over. The scars you carry, visible or invisible, do not define your future. You can be reborn. You don't have to do it alone. Comment below. Renaissance is possible if this story touched you in any way. Look, if you've made it this far, I already know this story resonated with you in some way. And that's important, because stories like James and Sarah's aren't just entertainment to pass the time. They remind us of something we sometimes forget in the rush of daily life. That human connection is still the most powerful thing that exists. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, subscribe now. Every week I bring you real stories of people who went through the impossible and found their way back. These are stories that don't appear in the news, lives that deserve to be honored, messages that you might need to hear at exactly the right moment. And it may be that in a few weeks, one of these videos will be exactly what you or someone you love needs. And if you really connected with this story, leave a like below. It's not just a button, you know? It's your way of telling me that the time we spent together was worthwhile.